In this episode of Smiling Again, I will be speaking with Chad Mierau, who is the author of a novel called Surviving the Crash. I have to say that I believe this is going to be a challenging conversation for many reasons. And all the more reason for us to have this talk because of the positive impact that it can have on so many. So I'm super grateful for Chad, his willingness to be here with me today. Chad, welcome, and thank you for being here to talk to me.
Thank you so much, Kim, for inviting me to, as you said, chat about some of the difficult things. Oftentimes we skate around the tough conversations, so I'm happy to be here to talk and see where it goes, and in hopes that it can assist and help other people navigate through some of the tough things they have going on in their lives. So This is great.
Thank you, Chad. So to help people understand what we're going to be speaking about today, the focus of this conversation is really around forgiveness. And 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago, Chad lost his sister, her husband, and their 2 children in a car accident. They were hit by a drunk driver. And in Chad's book called Surviving the Crash, he shares his story of forgiveness and your personal journey and growth through that experience. And that's what I would like to chat through today. So it's not going to be a light conversation. Now, in this experience, what I will also share with you, something that you don't know, is many years ago, my own sister was in a car crash with her husband and her 3-week-old baby, and they too were hit by a drunk driver. They survived.
Oh, wow.
So having this conversation with you, I feel somewhat privileged that my sister lived, that my family lived. So I can only imagine, listen to me. I can only imagine the emotions that you must go through and talking about this again. And I know that's something that you talk about openly. I'm going to read something that Chad said, which is, the more I talk about it, the more I realize that I need to be even more public about the entire experience. So Chad, could you please tell us about what compelled you to go on this journey and to share this story?
Wow, that truly is a loaded question. In 2016, when I was going through what I call my grief fog, my grief journey, I found myself having conversations with other people that were struggling with different things in their lives, and 24 hours a day. If I couldn't sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning, I found myself in conversations with other folks that were dealing with tough things in their life and hard times. So there was a commonality there. And the more that I shared openly with truly how I was feeling, how I was doing, what was working, what wasn't working, the more that other people were connecting to me and connecting to my story. And that amped up into 2018. I did a ton of personal development and some work on myself to figure out what made me tick and what was going on for me, and truly wanting to make sure I was healthy in my journey. And in doing that, I found myself in rooms with a couple hundred other people at times where I was sharing little snippets of my story and being real with it and being raw. And you can imagine a room of a few hundred people, most of them crying, as I'm talking about losing my family and how it's affected me and what point I'm at in my journey. The very profound part of that was people coming up to me afterwards and sharing with me some of the hard things that have happened in their lives And one woman in particular shared with me how she had been through an abusive relationship and she had gotten out of it 5 or 6 years previous. And she was stuck. She didn't know how to carry on. She didn't know how to move forward. And when I shared my story in front of the room, something shifted in her and it gave her an opportunity to move forward. It gave her hope. And that was the theme that was coming forward to me, was people were saying, I have some hope. She told me, she said, I'm excited to go home. I feel like I have some tools. I have some things to lean on based on what you shared in your story. And that hit me hard. I realized that the more open I was with how I was doing in my journey, the deeper I went, the more people that were connecting with it in one way or another. And into 2019, I went to a MAD conference in Toronto, and it was kind of the same sense there, where there's a room of hundreds of people that are struggling on different levels. And when I talked about my story and I said the word forgiveness in a room of other people that had lost siblings, it's a word that nobody else really used. And you know that struck me, that hit my heart in a very different way, in that I thought, okay, some of these other folks are really struggling still. And I thought, if I can share my story and my journey, I bet I can help somebody in this room. And that essentially is how the book came about, knowing that every time I was open with my story and how I was feeling, folks were connecting with it.
Mm.
And I just felt the urge, and I was overwhelmed with, I was called to do it. I was Something in me just said, you have to do this. You got to put it down on paper for others to pick it up and read it, and sort of getting this feeling that my story could be somebody else's guide.
Mm. There's so much there that you've mentioned, and thank you for sharing that. You mentioned early on, you were talking about your grief fog. And I think this is something that many of us can relate to, is that feeling of that grief fog. How much do you think sharing your story helped you work your way out of that fog?
Very, very significant. The more open I was in 2016, in that first year, the better I was doing. The more I shared with others, the more it all comes down to giving. When the more I gave other people my time, my shoulder to cry on, my insights with grief, forgiveness, challenges in life, those sorts of things, the better I was doing. So there was a shift for me in that the more I became outward focused and helping others navigate through their journey, the better I was doing in mine.
Mm, that's really beautiful, being outward focused. Um, I think that that's something that I've definitely discovered on my journey. I always say that with every word we heal, and yes, that helps me on the inside as I delve into myself and learn more about myself through healing. But it is, sharing things outwardly that helps so much too. Sharing love is such an important part of healing. Now,
100% agree.
with forgiveness, I've made some notes here because I knew this was going to be a really, really difficult one for me. So please forgive me for referring to my notes. But there was a few things that I wanted to mention here. And one was around forgiveness as the route to inner peace and strength. And it's, I believe, it's Louise Hay in some of her writings that I've read, where she talks about forgiveness is about letting go. So when you're finding yourself stuck in a situation, it's through forgiveness that we can move forward. And we always tend to think about, but how do you forgive? And she talks about it's not about the how, it's about just having the willingness to forgive. So with your experience with forgiveness, how did you forgive? Going back to the how, was it a how or was it a willingness? What's been your experience?
For me, it was both. It was um, I knew I knew I was in trouble if I didn't deal with what was going on inside me. So essentially, for me, navigating my way through forgiveness, it started with me. I had to be able to look in the mirror and, really explore who I was and the things that I've done in my life that I'm not super proud of, and some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the sins that I've, you know, done. Like I can't undo any of those things. What I can do is give myself some grace, and I can explore who I truly am and understand that all those things are part of my growth journey. They're all part of me understanding who I am. So essentially diving into, my own journey and forgiving myself. I believe I can't forgive anybody else until I've forgiven myself. And, going a step further, it comes to judgments. I can't judge other people, in a positive way unless I'm doing the same for myself. So when I give myself some grace and, be kind to myself and not be so judgmental towards myself, that allowed me to forgive me. And once I was able to do that, then I start looking at people around me. And my dad passed away 10 years previous to the car wreck that took four of my favorite people. So it was, I was unpacking a lot in 2016. I had anger towards my dad. I had anger towards the drunk driver. And when I dug deep into that, I had anger towards me. So it all started with me. And it was this beautiful journey of truly being able to look in the mirror and being okay with what I saw. Not just 10 seconds, stand there for a few minutes. And once I was okay doing that, I was able to explore further. And what that allowed me to do is I started seeing the positives in, situations previous in my life that I was focusing all on the negatives. So understanding what is the lessons in it all and what are the positives from it all, and really exploring that with myself and other people and situations up until that point in my life. And so when you talk about willingness, I was willing to dive deep into me, which allowed me to dive deeper into everything else and everybody else. And dropping the judgments, it's a natural progression for me to go through all that experience and find forgiveness for others that have, my perception of events where they have done me wrong or harmed me, or even what I've done to myself. Just reflecting on all of that and allowing grace. That essentially that's my journey into forgiveness, and I think it's always an ongoing thing. To say that I've navigated through it is not the right terminology or the right thought process. It's an ongoing thing, always has to be. I'm going to continue to make mistakes. We all do. So it's no different for other people in my life, and just allowing grace and allowing people to navigate through their journey without any judgments on my part. Truly, that's how I navigate through forgiveness, and it's a continuation.
Mm. I think it's when we talk about the experience that you've had, and when we talk about forgiveness, I think many people might automatically think about, well, how do you forgive the drunk driver who killed your family? And yet the conversation that you've shared is your journey of forgiveness into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you immediately think of, is it, when you think of the word forgiveness and the experience that you've had? How, what do you think someone, let's say there's someone else out there who's had an experience where they're stuck on forgiving someone for something that wronged them or happened to them? What would you say to them?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. Perception of events. So if somebody's hurt me, I truly look, beyond whatever event happened or whatever was said that possibly hurt my feelings, or whatever I'm stuck on, and really dive into what's the lesson in it, right? What can I learn from whatever just happened or happened many years ago? Because quite often we hold on to things for a long time, and that's what works for me. And when I talk about that, it's okay. So somebody's taken four of my favorite people, and for me, it became a curiosity. I wonder what she's like. I wonder what brought her to this point in her life. I wonder what was her upbringing like. I wonder, how has she been doing when she's incarcerated in a healing lodge? I had all of these curiosities popping into mind. So for me, that's what sparked it all. I wanted to know more. So then I reached out to her adult children, who I, through some social media platforms, they were commenting on some of the things with sentencing for their mom and different things like that. So I'd figured out who they were, and I reached out to her children, and I shared my forgiveness. I asked a few questions, and that sparked conversation between me and her children, and that fed my curiosity initially, wanting to know a little bit about her. And eventually that led me into, sitting in a coffee shop with her daughter and having this amazing conversation about life and how she's doing since her mom went away for this horrific crime. And, her sharing on how hard it was for her to learn that her mom had committed this crime, and how hard it was for her to know that her daughter, like her kids, were the same age as my niece and nephew. So that hit her really hard, knowing that her mom committed this act and took these two little kids away, and her own grandkids the same age. So we had this really amazing conversation in a coffee shop, and tears and sharing from the heart. And when I talk about it in my book, I say healing hearts, healing together, and we're on this journey together. And that, so coming back to your question, that's a very long answer, but it's, to me, that's what it was about, is diving into what is that other person like, trying to find the positives. What was their upbringing like, and who are they really right now, truly? If somebody's harmed or hurt me, looking into what their intentions were, right? Nobody intends to really truly harm somebody, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So, diving into that and sort of changing my perception of the events just a little bit. Um, to me, that's an important part with forgiveness. Is things can happen to us that are bad or negative, and if we change our perception just slightly, in that our journey through this thing called life takes lots of different twists and turns, and it's our choice as to how we react to these events. Even if people are doing things to us that we don't like, or aren't fair or aren't right, we still have a choice in how we react. We still have a choice in how we move through it. So for me, that was the important part in finding grace in some of it, in all of it. And I had to. I couldn't let it consume me. I couldn't let it I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole that I couldn't get out of. So that's where my curiosity came from, in that there had to be a different way for me to navigate through that.
I think that's really important to, I'm going to repeat it, that you had a choice of how to react to something and a choice of how to move through it. And regardless of what the situation is in life, it may not feel like we have a choice. It might feel like we're wronged, but you always, always have a choice. And you've explained that so beautifully, the choice that you made to be curious, and how that's impacted your life. And I imagine it's had a huge impact on their lives too. Having that conversation with you, and that over coffee, that must have helped the daughter so much in some way.
Hmm.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, they her son and I talk nearly every day.
Mm.
Um, and those two, our conversations, I can't even begin to explain to anybody how amazing they've been, particularly the first few. When I told friends and family I was doing it, they didn't understand. They thought, wow, that's pretty interesting that you're doing that. That would be really incredibly difficult and hard to do. And you know, for sure it was. I knew that I needed to do it. I knew that I needed to reach out to them, and I wanted to know how they were doing too. And sharing forgiveness with her kids, and understanding and learning that I was further along in my forgiveness than they were, um, was certainly a challenge. And they've told me since that if I hadn't reached out, they don't know where they would be at in their journey. So everything sort of fell into place, and I believe happened for a reason. Um, I was meant to go do that and talk to them and speak to them. We've helped each other immensely along the way.
Mm. Everyone that we speak to on the podcast is someone who's been impacted in some way by alcoholism or addiction. We talk about the wider impact on families, and this story is slightly different in the sense that you lost your family to a drunk driver, and that's a very, very completely different story than what we usually focus on. So I think it's really important through this story for everyone to understand the much, much, much wider implications of drinking or alcoholism, and the impact that it can have on families, not just direct families, but anyone. So I am grateful that you're here sharing this story with us, Chad. It might help people understand the importance of maybe going that extra step to stop someone from getting in a car if they've had too much to drink. Because for me personally, with a husband who drank, that wasn't always an easy thing to do. And when you love someone and you see them doing something that can have very serious implications, it takes every little bit of courage that you have to try to stop it. So I hope anyone listening right now, I hope this compels you to, in those moments, to dig deep, to find that courage and do what it takes to stop that person from driving that car.
That sounds amazing. My sister was my best friend. I talked to her every day. And to learn the news that she's gone, and those phone calls just are gone. And my niece and nephew that were 5 and 2 just gone, and my brother-in-law. I don't even know how to put into words or convey to somebody how hard that is to deal with, and the implications that has for a family going forward. We're 6 years out, and it's still a difficult thing to deal with. Our conversations are different. Our relationships in our family are different. You know, I don't even talk about it in my book, but the financial impact on how that is for a family. I'm self-employed and an entrepreneur, and not showing up for life for a year has a huge impact on everything. So yeah, it's super important for people to do their best in helping others, not getting behind the wheel when they're intoxicated, or drugs is an issue in vehicles, or texting on cell phones is an issue, any of that kind of stuff. If you know somebody's doing it, you have an obligation to stop that, because it could be your family that's gone. It could be your go-to person, your best friend, your spouse, your children. It could be anybody that you know in your family that could be taken away. So yeah, it's super important to step up. It's your responsibility to try your best to prevent that from happening if you know it is happening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it really does take every ounce of strength that you have to speak up, because you never want to get a loved one in trouble, but you also don't want anyone to be harmed. So it's a very difficult moment to be in. So I think it's really, really important to remember to do the difficult thing, to push through the discomfort and do the difficult thing, because it's so very important for all of us that you do. You must continue to be of help where you can. So I hope everyone hears that message, um, so that we can have a positive impact on reducing these types of accidents, and prevent losing life in this way.
Absolutely.
So this is, as I said, it's going to be a very hard conversation, a very difficult one, Chad. And I'm just so grateful that you've been here to have this conversation with me. Um, I'm just trying to think of something funny we could say now. Because it's just so important to always look on the bright side, and that's why I'm going to end the episode with gratitude. I always ask my guests to think of 3 things that they're grateful for, because it's through gratitude that we can change our thinking to focus on the positive. So Chad, what are 3 things that you're feeling grateful for at this very moment?
Pretty easy for me. I'm grateful for my relationships on a daily basis with my spouse Angie, and all of our kids. She has 4 and I have 2. So always grateful for family. Our parents are all doing well, so I'm super grateful for that. This morning's coffee. Let me tell you, when a perfect cup of coffee is made, there's not really anything better in the morning to get you going. So I'm grateful for that. And the sunshine. It's always nice to see the bright, beautiful sun coming in the window.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And as I've already said, I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I'm grateful for your courage to share your story. And I'm grateful for your story of how you embraced forgiveness, and the journey that you have been on and that you will continue to be on, which I think is just such a wonderful thing to share with everyone. So thank you, Chad, for
Mhm.
being here with us today. I'm ever so grateful. I will put in the notes for the podcast the link to where people can find your book, which I do encourage everyone to purchase and to just learn from, because I think we could all learn through your journey of forgiveness, even if we can't relate to the loss that you've experienced. And hopefully people never have to, but they can learn from the journey of forgiveness.
Sounds beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And with that learning of forgiveness, I think there'll be a lot more people who learn to smile again a lot more often.
Mm,
Thank you.
beautiful.